Sometimes, my friends, you got to take one for the team. You know what I mean? So for a little while now, as taking one for the team, I have been using a Chromebook of all things. And this has been, let me tell you, this has been an interesting experience. Obviously, fuck Google. If we got to get that out of the way, let's get that out of the way. I think it'd be interesting to do this review before the October 9th event, which is coming up, where Google is probably going to release a bunch of new hardware. And that new hardware actually does include, apparently, new Chromebooks, or more specifically, first implementations in a very real sense of their dream of, I mean, there's been the Pixelbook before, but apparently these new Pixelbooks, or what I think their code names are, like Nocturna or Nocturnal, and then there's another one, but where you're going to really see the fruition of this mixture between Android and Chromebooks, and so much more. So that's something to be expected coming, again, October 9th, apparently. So, but I think it's important to talk about the state of where Chromebooks are right now. Chromebooks have, and this is going to be a Chromebook review. This is a review of the Chromebook that I have been using, specifically the Acer Chromebook 15 CB515. I don't know if they're, what their next iteration of the Chromebook 15 is going to be. Acer has a new Chromebook 13 coming out. Of course, 15 means that it has a 15-inch screen. 13, I assume, would mean that it has a 13-inch screen, and so on. We'll get into a review of that, but let's talk a little bit about Chromebooks first off. So Chromebooks have become significantly more interesting in 2018, more so than they ever have been. Now, years ago, when I was, as I kind of self-described, as a Google fanboy, and I mean, we're talking many years ago, I did use a Chromebook very much as my daily driver. At the time, to give a little perspective, at the time, the work that I was doing largely could be done in a web browser. And I actually really liked the lack of multitasking that Chromebooks allowed for at the time. It kind of limited me and kept me centered and focused on the task at hand. Also at the time because I was doing Sovereign Tech at the time, I was, I was recording in Stephanie's studio as compared to in the BDSM studio, which I'm in now. But I was recording in Stephanie's studio. And so I didn't need a computer that could, that could handle a podcast, that could record a podcast, because Chromebooks couldn't do that at the time. Can they now? Well, we're going to talk about that. But, with that in mind, I could get away with using effectively a thin client, which is really what Chromebooks have been for the past few years. Since they initially came out, they've really just been a reintroduction of what's known in the computing world as the thin client. Now, thin client, as compared to perhaps full client, thin client means that it is a computer effectively designed to interact with other servers. It is not a computer designed to interact independent, or designed to be used independently. Okay, it is meant to connect to some other computer somewhere else. Now they call it the cloud, but in the 70s and 80s, it was servers. Okay, and so Chromebooks are far from a new idea. In fact, they're becoming a very old idea. And this Acer Chromebook 15, again, this is the latest Chromebook 15 that has come out, is kind of pointing at that even more. But what's made Chromebooks more interesting throughout 2018 is now there is more widespread implementation, in the stable channels. Because with Chromebooks, you have, obviously, they're running Chrome OS. Okay, we all know this story. But Chrome OS has effectively three different flavors. There's the stable channel, okay, which is the perfectly stable version of Chrome. Then there's the beta channel, where you can try out some of the later features, but it's still relatively stable. And then there is I guess what you would call the canary channel, which is the developer channel, where you're really getting the bleeding edge capabilities of what Chrome OS and Chromebooks can do. But that comes at a cost of, you might, some kind of hardware issue might come up, or software issue or something. It's not very stable, and you don't want to use that as your daily driver. obviously, because Chrome OS is effectively the Chrome web browser running as an entire operating system, this is very similar to, what you can do with web browsers, right? Or even like Firefox. Firefox has Firefox Beta, or it has, Aurora, that is, or what they used to call Aurora, which was, it's dev build where it's the bleeding edge features and so on. Personally, I think that it's foolhardy to run a Chromebook. Like, the one advantage that Chromebooks have, look, obviously Google can see everything, or I think it's obvious. Maybe it's not explicitly stated, but I think it kind of is. On a Chromebook, Google can see everything that you do, but as far as you could say, well, it's not secure then. And if Google can see it, the NSA can see it. But as far as having security away from everybody else that isn't Google or perhaps the U.S. government, a Chromebook is arguably the most solid, the most secure operating system out there. And I think that there's still a valid argument for using a Chromebook. In fact, even, you could talk to a lot of security researchers, and including myself, where if you ran a Chromebook in guest mode, okay, and you were just using it with very anonymous information that didn't, lead back to you in any way, it's a very secure little computer to be running. I mean, it's the security aspects of Chromebooks are still impressive as fuck. And that'll come up throughout this. So, but I want to have the opening disclaimer. That way I don't have to say it every time that yes, Google, can know what you're doing, just like Microsoft can do, say, with Windows 10. All right. Where they could track telemetry, depending upon what kind of build you're using and all of that. Okay. And once one of the tech giants has it, we are in a corporatist system, and is it going to eventually, can it end up to the U.S. government? Sure. Okay. But let's be clear on that. But outside of that, the security, is brilliant. Just like it is with a lot of things that the tech giants have put out there, including Apple and others. So just saying that in the beginning, that, we could talk about how great the security is on a Chromebook, but let's be clear, the one thing it's not secure from is Google, and thus by default the NSA. At least not really. I mean, there's ways you can kind of mitigate and make it expensive for them to even see what you're doing on the thing, but ultimately, it's, just like the Google Play Store is a rootkit, Chrome OS is effectively a rootkit into your digital life. Let's not, when it comes to Google and so on. So, let's just be clear about that. So, but I don't want to keep that from talking about, really what's very interesting going on with Chromebooks throughout 2018. Because they have gone from just being a thin client to where they are really becoming a full-on traditional computer. There's a long-running joke, I think, that, if you say, oh, what do you have for a computer? And you say you have a Chromebook. Oh, well, that's not a real computer. That's not true anymore. You can't make that joke anymore, because now Chromebooks throughout 2018, it has become more widespread, again, to have the aforementioned Google Play Store on it, and you can install Android apps, almost all Android apps, not all. I know that the claim is out there that you can run any Android app on a Chromebook. That is not true. There are certain apps that you cannot run on a Chromebook. And the Google Play Store will keep you from running it, which same thing happens with tablets. There's some apps you can't run on tablets, but you can run most. That's true. We'll talk about that. Also, now in the stable channels, okay, because again, both of these features used to only be in either the dev or beta channels, but now in the stable channels on a lot of Chromebooks, at least ones that are Intel-based and others, you can run Linux apps. Like, you can open up a Linux terminal, sudo apt-get, LibreOffice, and away you go. And you have LibreOffice, or whatever's in the repository that the Chromebook or the Chrome OS terminal will go for. And both the beautiful and remarkable thing of this ability is that the apps themselves are run in a sandbox, the Android apps and the the Linux apps are run. Each app is run in its own little sandbox so that it's separate from the rest of the system. It's done very securely. I mean, this is, and for such lightweight computers, because none of these have, like, except for the Pixelbooks and maybe a couple others, most Chromebooks have really, really lightweight hardware. And lightweight specs, okay? Like, they don't have the most impressive Intel processors, if they even have Intel processors. Sometimes they don't have the largest amount of RAM and everything. So for them to be able to pull that off, it's not necessarily virtualization, but in a way it is. I mean, it's pretty damned impressive what these things can do. And it's doing it right. Now, that does come at a cost. Okay, and it's a cost, again, that we will get into throughout this. But bottom line being that I want to get out of the way here is that Chromebooks have totally evolved to something. I mean, they are very much real computers. I can say that. I have been using one for a while now. It's not my daily driver, because we'll talk about that. But bottom line being, these are absolutely real computers. Stop making fun of people for using Chromebooks. Now, I mean, if you want to, pick on them because it's effectively, a Google backdoor, okay, fine, rip on them about that. But stop saying that these things aren't real computers. They most certainly are, and they're not thin clients anymore. They're not. They're really not thin clients anymore. They are full on traditional computers, and they're starting to come out with the specs to really to back that fact up. So the Chromebook, again, that we're specifically talking about, let's get into some of the specs here on this one. Again, this is the Acer Chromebook 15 CB515-1HT-P39B. That is the full name of it. And it's running a Intel Pentium N4200, which is effectively a really low-end quad-core. It has a 15-inch screen, which it's 1080p, and it is touchscreen. The touchscreen is a very interesting aspect of this. 4 gig of RAM, and it has a 32 gig flash hard drive in it. The build quality of this, it has 2 USB-C ports, 2 of them. So it does charge through USB-C, which there's an advantage to that. But it's nice that it has 2 ports, because if one of them has to be used for charging, then you want 2. That way you can hook up other USB-C devices. So this is fairly future-proof as far as that goes. And the nice thing is that if you have like a high enough voltage and milliampere like Anchor battery, for charging your phone on the go, you could also charge this laptop, which is really, really nice. Has 12 hours of battery life, and it gets about that. Like, I've been nothing less than amazed at the battery life that this thing gets. Not uncommon for an Acer device, or, for Acer hardware, but it really does deliver on that. It also has a backlit keyboard, which is very, very nice. And we're talking about a sub $300 laptop here. Price is important. This is sub $300. I mean, honestly, with everything I just described, if you wanted to get one and you wanted to slap some version of Linux on it, not just Chrome OS, which is effectively Linux based, but if you really wanted to slap some serious Linux on it, this would be a hell of a machine. Other than the 32 gig of storage is kind of, it'd be nicer if it was 64. Hell, it'd be nicer if it was 128. It'd be nicer if it was 1 terabyte, wouldn't it? But that's not what we got here. It does have a micro SD card slot, and you could put a 128 gig micro SD card into it, and hopefully, and that would help mitigate some of that storage, some of that storage concern. But this is one area that it really needs to evolve on, but I'm going to talk about that more in a second. It does have this laptop has some of the most impressive sound I've ever heard out of any laptop. Okay. It has 2 huge, fairly good sized speakers. On each side, they're forward facing, and they're on each side of the keyboard. This is a larger device. Okay. Again, it has a 15-inch screen, and it has a bezel. It's not like a bezel-less 15 where it feels like a 13. This is a full 15-inch computer. But the sound that comes out of this thing is pretty damned impressive. Like, if you're watching Netflix or CBS All Access or something on this, which, oh boy, that Short Trek started last night. Ooh, that was good. You're in for a treat. when it comes to that. I was very, very impressed. Like that's one of its shining qualities. The trackpad on it is good sized, but it feels kind of shitty. I've never really found an Acer device where I really like the trackpad on it. But that's neither here nor there, or at least in this case. You can always connect a mouse. Of course, this has Bluetooth, I think 4.2. As far as that goes, it has what they call wireless AC, or, quick comment on that. Actually, the Wi-Fi Alliance has now decided to rebrand wireless nomenclature. Okay, so what used to be called wireless N is now being called, I think, Wi-Fi 4. And what used to be called wireless AC, they're now calling Wi-Fi 5. I'm actually going to talk about this on this week's Sovereign Tech Prime episode. And what's now known as the next standard after AC, which is known as AX, I think they're calling that Wi-Fi 6. And this makes sense, partly because, or the only reason that I think that this is okay and that it makes sense, it still has the other technical terms too, but on the consumer-facing end, they're going to call it Wi-Fi 4, Wi-Fi 5, and Wi-Fi 6. The term wireless AC was really confusing, because at the same time that was getting developed, you were also trying to develop where, you had inductive charging, right, for your smartphone, where you didn't have to plug it in. You just put it on like you put it on a charging base, and it would just inductively charge. Okay, like, from the base right through to the phone. You never had to plug it in. Or there was the technology getting worked out where there could be, like, effectively, it's pretty much inductive charging, but there could be a charging base that would literally, without wires, like, send out a charging signal. Say you're sitting at a table or restaurant, and it would send out voltage, to your phone, and it would just charge your phone while you were sitting at the table. Not from the table, but like literally it'd be current coming from the air that would be charging your device. And so when people would talk about wireless AC as in wireless alternating current, not as in wireless AC as in the Wi-Fi standard, that got confusing with a lot of different stories. So A, I'm glad that we're going to wireless AX anyway, but B, I think that this change in terms is helpful, because I don't know that it's going to help necessarily with what I just described, and nobody's ever really implemented the wireless alternating current as in wireless AC, as far as I know, in that restaurant setting. But that was something that was being explored and developed. But anyway, so this has wireless AC. It has MIMO, which means that, it uses multiple signals to allow for faster internet. All of which is pretty impressive. It has two USB 3 ports, or 3.1, or 3.0 ports, whatever. And it has a headphone jack. So, this is, this has a lot of really great ports. It does not have HDMI. That is the one thing maybe that people would feel that it's missing. But you can get a connector and plug in anything pretty much into USB-C, and then that can give you your, your HDMI cord if you need it. And I messed with that. I hooked up external monitors to it, and it handled it with aplomb. Like, Chromebook has no problem handling, multiple monitors when you plug them in, say, to a laptop. So that's the tail of the tape. And it has a webcam that's, fairly shitty quality, but regardless, again, that's pretty much the specs here going forward. So you understand what that is. And this is, I would call this, it's not a Pixel book, but this is fairly high end for a Chromebook. Like, this is fairly high end specs for something in this class, and pretty standard specs, I think, for something in its price range too. Again, we're talking about what you can get now for sub $300. I think at new, maybe it was like at $350 or so. Even that's not a crazy price necessarily for what you're getting here. And part of the reason that they can sell it so low is that they don't have to pay the licensing fees it's pennies compared to the licensing fees you'd have to pay for a full-on Windows 10 computer. Okay. Now, so all of that said, let's start talking about the actual usability of this. And really it comes down to, so the hardware is fine. In fact, actually, this is like an aluminum block of a computer. Like, this really matches and looks just about as good as any MacBook out there that you can imagine. So this is very, very, very high end. or not very high end, but this is very well produced. I mean, this is a very nice computer for what it is. I mean, very, very nice. It's not really all that plastic or anything like that. So usability, software, I mean, there's been, there's material redesign and UI redesign and all that, blah, 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 blah. Not a whole lot has changed from when I was using, boy, I forget the model. It was one of the original Acers that came out, and it was just one of those like 12-inch or 11-inch jobs that Acer would put out that were like $200. But not a lot has changed as far as like overall function and UI of Chrome OS over the years. And again, that was probably 4 or 5 years ago now. I mean, it's still pretty standard fare. You have your icons along the bottom in the taskbar and so on. Even the wallpaper selector looks exactly the same that it did 4 or 5 years ago. So no real shifts in that. The way that you control, power and settings and a lot of this other stuff, all is pretty much the same and very easy to get to. One of the nice things about Chromebooks is that because it is an entirely new operating system with, in some ways a new way of thinking, even though now, like I said, it's going back to being, a traditional PC in a very real way. The nice thing is that they got rid of a lot of unnecessary keys, or they would reassign keys on the keyboard to do things that a modern computer, or that the modern person does with a modern computer. Okay. Like you don't really have caps lock. I think that that's totally valid to not have caps lock. I can barely think of the time that I ever even fucking use caps lock. It's just not a thing. And in its place, they put a search button, which also doubles as effectively like the window key or the Apple key or the, Ubuntu key or whatever. And it has very similar commands. If you hit search L, that locks your Chromebook and so on. And along the top row, there's no function keys. Which this could lend to maybe why it's not the best Linux computer, because you don't have a full keyboard, where you could take advantage of what those kind of commands and functions do within an actual Linux environment, or a more serious Linux environment, I should say. The top row just has a bunch of different, and a lot of laptop manufacturers are doing this now, where the function key, or F1, F2, F3, and whatever, will actually you have to hit a specific key to activate F1, F2, F3, and everything else really just controls, say, volume, brightness of the screen, whether or not Bluetooth is activated, and so on. But yeah, I do like that Chromebooks have kind of gotten away from a lot of keys that just most people will never use. Now, if I want those keys and I want all of that, well, obviously I'm not going to fucking buy a Chromebook, so it knows its market, and I think that that's okay. And I really appreciate that. And a lot of the simplicity of the keyboard commands, that, because there's a lot of things missing here. Like there's no delete key. There's a bunch of different ones, but you just hit Alt backspace and that does delete. It's impressive just how much thought went into key combinations and how much you can do with the keyboard in a Chromebook, regardless of the lack of a lot of these traditional key sets that the average keyboard has. But that works very well. I'm going to give them credit for that, and it's very intuitive and it makes sense what key commands you're putting in. Way more sense than what Windows does with Windows 10. Like Windows key X, like that. There's so many things that, again, they just don't make any goddamn sense. So I can respect that, and I can appreciate that. The web browser, now there was a time where a lot of apps would like take up full screen and just be completely full screen if you ran them in Chrome OS. That's no longer true. These are full-on multitasking machines now. And it's important to note that Chromebooks specifically, and only Chromebooks, still run Chrome apps, not just Chrome extensions, but Chrome apps. But we'll talk about kind of the validity around that in a minute here. So Chrome works. The web browser itself works just like Chrome. Works brilliantly, and is it the most private thing in the world? Of course not. But it does its job, and it works very, very well as far as that goes. So it's just like using Chrome anywhere else. Not a whole lot necessarily to say about that. We're already like 20 minutes in, so I want to get into the meat of all this. The point that I think is really what we need to get into here is the reason that I wanted to try out a Chromebook again, and that is the Android apps, running Android apps and running Linux software, or running, Linux applications. That's what this is all about. Because, saying that, because I couldn't get, like, some of the things, okay, I hear that Chromebooks can do this now. Oh, Chromebooks can run Android apps. Oh, Chromebooks can run Linux apps. Chromebooks can do this. Okay, and then you go to look online. All right, well, can it run Audacity, to do podcasts with? Can it run this game? Can it do this? Can it do that? Blah, blah, and you can't find, no, I don't know. Most people just don't seem to have an answer for it. And to some degree, that makes sense because, power users generally aren't going to use a Chromebook. So why would you know? Why would you be able to find out if someone can do that sort of thing when, the average person that does that sort of thing wouldn't use a Chromebook in the first place? But I wanted to know because, just out of my own curiosity, for one thing. And another thing, if you end up traveling pretty good, one of the valid use cases for a Chromebook is if you travel, because you can completely log out of the thing and then and go through customs and go through, whatever you need to go through to get into another country. And then you could re-log in when you once you're in the country, right? Just to kind of, mitigate and avoid all that hassle. So, there's really, and it, again, outside of Google and maybe certain governments, it is a very secure platform. Yeah, it's a super secure platform. So it's a fine thing to take with you when you're traveling. It really is. And that was also something that I wanted to, test out. But of course, the first thing for me is that my life, I have work outside of this, of course, that very much pays the bills, but my life is very much my show. My podcast is everything to me. And so can I record a podcast on a Chromebook? Well, I guess that'll lead us into talking about Linux apps first, because really Android is not at the point where you can, there's some apps out there for Android that would effectively allow you to record a podcast, but not really. And there isn't as elegant as a solution as, say, like how iPhone has GarageBand. iOS has GarageBand, and that's a brilliant, that's great software, to record a podcast on. Android doesn't have a real corollary to that. Okay, so Android apps were not going to allow for this. So let's talk about running Linux apps first and foremost on this. Again, Linux app capability, it is a setting. I think it's normally on now, but not every Chromebook can do it. Okay, but it is in the stable channel now. Now, I think I did have to there was a switch that I had to effectively flip to allow for Linux. And what it really did is it gave you access to the terminal when you did that. And, it's a pretty standard Linux terminal. It uses sudo commands and so on. And, the first thing you're going to do as soon as you get the terminal, sudo apt-get update, and away you go. It's off to the races as far as that goes. Now, you can install through the terminal, or if it's a deb package, okay, if it's a Debian package, you can download that, and you can actually just you put it into, so in the file explorer for Chrome OS, you will have your Chrome OS's effectively environment, okay, that you have access to. And again, this is all within the 32 gigs of storage that this Acer Chromebook 15 has. Then underneath that, there will be it's Android files, or Play files, and then under that will be Linux files. Okay, and so in the file explorer itself, and it does have a traditional file explorer, you have three different environments that you're dealing with: the Chromebook itself, Android, Android apps, and Linux apps. Okay, now if you download a deb package, okay, say for VLC or Audacity or whatever, and you drag it into the Linux apps partition on the, and it's all very self-explanatory. Like, they've made it it's about as easy as I think it can get. It might sound complicated, but it's not at all. And you can then right-click within the file explorer. You can right-click on the deb package and say install Linux app, and it'll do it for you automatically. You don't have to go through the terminal. Sometimes, though, you do have to go through the terminal. Like I had trouble. So LibreOffice is up to LibreOffice 6. I downloaded the deb package for that, but it didn't seem to like it. Like, it didn't really want to work. But when I went through the terminal and I just did, sudo apt-get LibreOffice, it installed LibreOffice 5. So I'm not sure what what repository that Chrome OS is pulling from. But that worked great, and LibreOffice works like a dream on this thing. And it's not, why would you have LibreOffice when you have Google Docs? Well, obviously, it's great offline functionality, and it's independent of Google Docs. I think that's a fine thing to have. It was one of the first pieces of software that I installed on this Chromebook. And again, it works great. I mean, it really, really works great. And it's very handy to have a full-featured independent, particularly LibreOffice's, Word, or Libre, whatever they call it, Libre Word, whatever. It's really handy to have that. Like, you don't realize it until you need it. And yeah, that if it couldn't even do that, this all would have been bullshit. But again, the main thing I wanted to run was Audacity. Audacity does not, even if you get a deb package, Audacity does not work, okay, running it as a Linux app. That doesn't mean I wasn't able to get Audacity to work. I did, but we're going to talk about that because there's kind of a middle ground here that you can take advantage of. So yeah, LibreOffice installed fine. I was actually able to install Steam just by downloading the deb package of Steam for Ubuntu, and Steam works well. Not every game that I tried installing through Steam worked like with the control scheme. Like there was, okay, it could kind of work with the keyboard and mouse, but it wouldn't recognize, say if I plugged in the Duke, I plugged in a controller, a USB controller of some kind, it wouldn't recognize it. Also, it didn't do a good job of recognizing even controllers that I have, Bluetooth controllers that are specifically designed for Android. Which should work with Chrome OS. It did not. It didn't always recognize those very well. So gaming is, no pun intended, touch and go, because the touchscreen might work fine for you, but using a touchscreen on this thing or using any touchscreen on a laptop, personally, I think is a pain in the ass. I mean, you look like a zombie when you're messing with it, and I think that's just really inefficient. There's times where I'm glad the touchscreen is there. We'll get into those, but. Yeah, so because of the sandbox nature, I think, of running a lot of these different, running Linux apps specifically, the apps do not interact well with the rest of the operating system. And in fact, this is kind of point one against it. And hopefully they can somehow fix this in the future. But on a security standpoint, you almost don't want them to. So you only have 32 gig of storage, right? So you're kind of limited in how much you can install on this thing, and you really are, especially when you start installing, full-featured Linux apps. Those Linux apps, in general, cannot access. Say you put in a 128 gig micro SD card to make up for the lack of storage space. It generally cannot access that. You cannot access the apps from, say, like you associated, for example, with Audacity, like an AUP file with what's. With, say, Audacity, if you got Audacity installed as a Linux app, again, that didn't exactly work. They're not going to recognize, they're not going to see each other because they're in completely different, segments of the operating system. So that's a bit of a problem. Okay, is that you can't, or like say you wanted, like was it Music Brain's Picard? That's really great MP3 tagging software. That's available for Linux. I think it's on a bunch of operating systems, but it's handy. I installed that as a Linux app, and I had to put the MP3 files into a folder that Music Brains could recognize. I could not just leave them on my micro SD card for that to work. That sucks. Okay, because unless you're getting a Pixelbook or some other high-end Chromebook that has like 128 gig or even 512 gig or something, that has a significantly larger hard drive, this runs into a problem because say you wanted to tag a ton of music, not happening, right? Because you'd have to store it onto the hard drive, the storage within the device, within the Chromebook itself, but you might not have enough room to do that. So that becomes a pain in the ass. So it's not, while the Linux apps that I was able to install worked pretty well. In fact, LibreOffice, like I said, worked great. Granted, it's just a word processor, but still, even though these things work, there are limitations to how much you can do with that and how far that can go that make it more of a bonus than as a like a full feature and an advantage really to using it. It feels more like a bonus than anything else. Now, a lot of Linux apps would not work. There's a very, very small selection of ones that would. Audacity did not. Now, how did I solve that? Well, the Acer Chromebook 15 came with the Google Play Store already installed, and ready to go and ready to use. And this is where things get really interesting. So Linux app functionality, it's there and it's nice, but you kind of treat it as a bonus. It's not an afterthought, and it's probably going to get better over time. But right now, it's pretty limited functionality, even though it is in the stable channel. Again, maybe that'll evolve over time. We'll see. Now, with the Google Play Store, this is where things get really interesting, and this is where I think that a Chromebook becomes genuinely attractive. And the first part is I'm going to talk about something in between Linux app functionality and having Android apps. There is an app called Crossover. Okay. Now, this is available for full-on Linux distros. It's available for Mac OS. It's available for a lot of different platforms. But Crossover is effectively a Windows emulation environment, okay, that allows you to run Windows apps or Windows software within whatever operating system you happen to be using. Now, the company that makes Crossover specifically released a version in the Google Play Store knowing that it would be used on Chrome OS. Like, they were fully cognizant and aware of this. And it's one of where a lot of Android apps can come out looking very funny and may not work very well within a Chromebook or a Chrome OS environment right now anyway, or at least as it stands. Crossover works like a dream, and it is the most native-looking Android app that I had installed. And what it allowed for is, yes, for me to run some Windows software, not all, but it did let me run Audacity. And it runs Audacity fairly well, though Audacity sometimes will crash on bigger projects. Like, I was editing, not my podcast, but another podcast. I was editing it, and it was about an hour in length. And eventually I had to stop because, and I'm talking about I was doing like really knee-deep full editing. If it was an episode of Sovereign Tech, I usually don't edit those much. It probably wouldn't have been an issue, okay? But if you're doing like really serious editing, Audacity takes up a lot of resources, a lot of hard drive space and a lot of other resources. And the Chromebook did not like that. And partly, I don't think it's because the Chromebook has I think plenty of guts to run Audacity. I don't think it's that. I think Crossover maybe had problems with memory management, and so Audacity would crash here and there. I did record some podcasts with it, so it seemed to be able to handle recording that. But that's really something to be aware of. But I think overall that worked. It was more when I was editing that it was kind of an issue, and I can understand why. But yeah, I was able to download the exe file, download the exe for Audacity, and boom, the latest version of Audacity. I had it running on a Chromebook. But again, I'm running a Windows version of Audacity. I'm not even running the Linux version. And for some people, that might be seen as anathema, to them to even do that. As to where they might find Chrome OS slightly more palatable because it's Linux based, and just because they want to get out of the Microsoft ecosystem and so on, you're still effectively using Windows software here to do some not basic things, but to do some things that I think a lot of people want to do with their computers, such as audio work. So that, considering that Google is kind of hot on podcasts right now, and they are, you'd think that they would do something to like it can't be hard for them to come out with some kind of audio editing software, like their own version of GarageBand that they could put out on a Chrome OS. I think if they did that, these would become even more interesting. But yes, you can run Audacity on it. What Crossover can run is kind of limited. There are things that I want. Apparently, you can install Steam with it, but again, you can do that with the deb package. You don't need to do that through Crossover. There are some pieces of software that I tried to run through. Well, there's a couple actually. So I tried to run some of this as a Linux app, and I tried to run it as a Crossover app, a Windows app. And it didn't work either way. For example, Trezor, Trezor as in the Bitcoin hardware wallets. The Trezor Bridge software. Now there is a Chrome OS version of that. Here's the problem: is that some software like that requires you to to allow for functionality between the software itself, as in Trezor Bridge, and say your web browser, right? That's how Trezor kind of does its business. So I tried to get that to work, because if that wouldn't fly, I mean, there's no way that Chrome OS could ever be my daily driver. And there's a whole slew of concerns that you could have around, using a hardware wallet with something that Google is obviously, so knee deep in. But that's another conversation. Okay. That I disclaimed earlier. So, but that just didn't work, and it didn't work either. I tried it as the deb package, and it didn't work, and it didn't work as a Windows XE. Okay, and I think the reason why is that these apps are all being run sandbox, so they're designed to not communicate with the web browser as a matter of security. Okay. So just like where, it doesn't interact with, say, your micro SD card, that's also a matter of security. In fact, we've learned about this, that the fact that Android itself, not Chrome OS, but that Android lets you access a micro SD card, lets you access external storage, that is potentially an exploit that's been talked about. I think it was either at Black Hat or DEF CON that was illustrated this year. So, again, for security's sake, yeah, you lose a lot of this cross functionality. Okay, and Trezor Bridge just didn't work. Now, you could say that there's a Chrome extension for Trezor, but that doesn't really function very well either. And I see this almost as a good thing, but I'm just letting you know that if you're hoping for that, that's not really possible. Speaking of apps and extensions for Chrome itself that are native to Chrome OS, Signal is still updated to some degree as a Chrome app, even though, again, it's an independent app now for all other operating systems. But it seems quite a few features back. Like, it seems like quite a few versions back. It's very easy to just install the deb package of Signal Desktop, and it works beautifully. I mean, it works like an absolute dream on there. So you can run Signal, on Chrome OS very, very easily. And I imagine you could have also run it if you needed to do it through the XE, through using Crossover. You could have done that. So Crossover, allowing you to run some Windows software, is very handy. I mean, it's very, very handy. But because of the sandbox nature of it within Chrome OS, there's some functionality that you're not going to get, and it almost makes it impractical. Like, it is very tough after you install the Google Play apps that you want, after you install some of the Linux software that you want, and perhaps some of the Windows software you want on Chrome OS with a Chromebook that only has 32 gig of storage. You run out of storage pretty fast, and then it also becomes impractical to try and record a podcast on it, because the temp files for a podcast can run anywhere from 2 to 9 gigabytes, and that might be all you have left, after all is said and done. And again, you can't take advantage of, because of the secure nature of it, you can't take advantage of the micro SD card, of the extra storage that you put in like that. It's just not going to happen. And you can't install apps to the micro SD card either. Again, not going to happen. So you do run into some practical concerns as far as that goes. So Crossover is an interesting aspect of this. Not only, basically what we're getting at here is, you can run some Linux apps, but you can run Linux apps. You can run some Windows software, but you can run Windows software. And you can more natively run Android apps in Chrome OS. And then you can do whatever Chrome OS offers. That's what makes this is why I wanted to test it, because this makes this a very attractive package. This makes this a very attractive option, because you can run so much different software, with very little work. I mean, it's not native, but it's not far off from that. Now, real quick with Crossover, you get like a free trial for however long. You do eventually have to pay for Crossover, and I think it's not the cheapest software. I mean, it's not $100, but it's, I don't know, 40 something. I forget how much they said it was. I'm not really going to continue on with this, so I'm not going to buy it. But you do eventually have to buy it. I mean, maybe I'd end up buying it so I could run Windows software on an Android phone, but I'd need to be using an Android phone where I thought that it had enough balls to even bother. But let's get to the meat of the whole deal here, okay? And that is, Crossover is an Android app. Let's talk about running Android apps. You get the full Google Play Store in this. Obviously, it's able to take advantage, because this is a desktop environment, it gets to take advantage of certain apps and certain abilities that were developed more for Android tablets to make it look somewhat better on a, again, in a desktop environment. And this works very well. The Google Play Store, it's just like and potentially love it, though probably not, on your Android smartphone or Android tablet. Having the touchscreen is very handy as far as this goes on the laptop, because there are some functions that just don't seem to translate well to a touchpad or, a trackpad or touchpad or mouse. Even though they're supposed to work, they don't exactly work the best all the time. And so having a touchscreen where you can do what you need to with touch is very handy. But yeah, you can install, most of the mainstream apps that you can think of, you can install onto your Chromebook. And I installed quite a bit. And it does get interesting. Like you can install, Telegram, even though there's a Chrome OS app for Telegram. You can install Telegram, and maybe you don't want to install the Chrome OS version of Telegram, because the desktop version of Telegram, there is an issue with IP leaking, right? Even though it's not as bad as the media was claiming, but regardless, maybe you want the full featured secret chat, blah blah blah, version of the mobile app. You can run that here. I suppose you could also run. I didn't try this because you have to, I didn't have an available phone number to give it a shot. I suppose you could run the Signal app. It installs. And so, you could run Signal, like the actual Signal app in a desktop environment. That gets interesting. I installed Pandora. Pandora actually works really well because of its the way that its tablet features make it look really nice. So you can run the mobile app of Pandora. That's cool. Instagram. This gets interesting, right? Because now you could do, you could defend effectively, and I've talked about this years ago, actually, on Sovereign Tech. You could turn Instagram into a blogging platform, right? Where, now you could actually edit and, because you can install Pixlr maybe, as your photo editor on this from the Google Play Store. Again, we're talking all Android apps right now. But you could run Instagram natively, and, you could upload, say, pictures that you edit and do a lot of professional work with, or even videos or something from Chrome OS, and then you could type out a really long screed on it, and you're not using a touchscreen keyboard to do it anymore. You're using a full keyboard. So Instagram running natively, very interesting aspect of this. Maybe one of the most interesting aspects of what you can do, with a Chromebook. Even though I know if you have a Windows 10 computer that has a touchscreen, you can also upload video and photos to the Windows 10 UWP app. But the UWP app on Windows 10 is behind on a lot of features. As to where you're getting the full-on, premier mobile app. It makes it very interesting. And the update process is just like you do on your regular Android phone, where you go to the Google Play Store, you go to my apps, and you click update, and it'll update all of them. You can, this is just, you can install Line Messenger. You can install your favorite, music playing software, whatever. There's a lot of options. You can install Torrent Plus, and you can do torrents through it. Even though there was like JS Torrent, and you can actually install Transmission. The very popular Linux torrent client. You can install that through the terminal. If you really want to, but you can run Torrent Plus, and it can do torrents, which is pretty cool. But again, you have limited storage, so it depends on what you're actually going to be torrenting. The other interesting thing is that the Chrome web browser, when it detects something that maybe should use some kind of Android app, it gives you a little pop-up that says, would you like to open this with this app? Which that's kind of cool too. Like that's a very nice little feature. So Android app functionality with Chrome OS is definitely a premier selling point, and Google knows it, and they're working with it. One of the nicest things that this computer could really do is Moon Reader Plus. That's what I use to usually read comic books on, say, an Android tablet or on my smartphone. Which I think is, and it works, and to read PDFs and everything, it works really well. I could install that, and reading comic books on this screen, it has a 1080p IPS screen, in 15 inches, is really a joy. I'll admit that is really, really nice. But speaking of reading, you could also install the Kindle app, and that works well. If you want to listen to audiobooks, you can install, the Audible, the full-on Audible app. I know there's one for Windows 10. There's the UWP app, but regardless, that's a great experience on here. There's also, you can install smart audiobook player and, independently you're going to have to actually smart audiobook player might have been able to access the micro SD card. No, maybe it couldn't. But again, you run into that issue where you'd have to have all those audiobooks installed onto or, downloaded onto the actual, 32 gig of storage, which isn't much. As to where, with my Moto E4, I use Smart Audiobook Player to listen to my audiobooks that I don't get from Audible. And I mean, I can put tons of them, on a 128 gig SD card, and Android can access them. Chrome OS, that's not true. So, and then Pocket Casts, even though Pocket Casts is a great web interface and web version of itself that you can use if you pay like $9, which I've done that, but you can run Pocket Casts natively. I mean, this gets, and it is shocking just how well it does work. And so most of the Android apps that I think you'd want to use, you can run on this, and having it with full keyboard and mouse functionality, or if you really need it, you do have touch with the touchscreen. I mean, that really opens a lot of possibilities and gives you a great, if not a great, computing experience, it is a great consumption experience. As to where, if this is how you want to take in content, that's really the best thing about it. And it's really great to really interact with the content when you have a full-on computer running it and it's not just on your smartphone. In fact, you really come to the realization of just how piss-poor an interactive experience smartphones and tablets are when you finally run a lot of these apps and take advantage of what these apps can do on a full-on computer, on a laptop. I mean, that really comes to head. And I've known this for a while, and I've talked about it on the show, but I mean, you really notice it when you're running it on a Chromebook. But not every app works the best, and not every app is installable. Again, let's really, really make that clear. And also, again, these apps are all sandboxed, so they don't interact the best with the rest of the operating system. And also, they may not interact the best with what you say, like any devices, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, when you plug in certain controllers, certain game pads, they don't work often enough with, say, the Android games that you can install. And you can install Android games. I installed Dragon Quest V, and it was a Hand of the Heavenly Bride. I installed that, and here's what sucked is almost nothing except for the touchscreen worked with that. And that was one of the things. I mean, again, my first and most important thing that I need to be able to do with the computer is do the podcast. Okay. So if I'm going to treat the Chromebook as an actual computer, and for all intents and purposes now, I think they're not thin clients anymore. I got to be able to do a podcast. So I could kind of do that. Second thing I'd like to really be able to do is, word processing is important, but just about anything can do that. But the second thing I want to do is be able to run games, and this does not, and not because of the horsepower of the laptop itself, because of the software. It doesn't give me what I was hoping for. It doesn't give me the experience that I wanted, as far as, okay, I can play Android games and I can connect, I can connect a controller to the laptop, and I will finally be able to really use a controller, play all those classic platformers and all these other things that are available in the Google Play Store, but I can do it right, where I'm not dealing with the touchscreen. Does not work that way. Even like there's the more popular emulators. I tried playing some Super Nintendo games on there. It more or less forces you to use touch controls. It does not, because of the way that Android and Linux and everything else is being emulated within it, the interactivity that you need or the interconnectedness that you need of devices and of the operating system communicating within itself just isn't there. It's just not there. And that's unfortunate. You wouldn't read that anywhere else. And believe me, I tried to find those answers, and I just don't see anybody else really talking about it. That's why I think it's important to do this episode and to do this review. To really break it down, what can and what can't you do with the new functionalities that Chromebooks have, that being with running Linux, honestly also Windows apps, and, and Android apps. But outside of gaming, the Android app use experience is pretty much great. I'm going to say great, minus, a couple flubs here and there where, you have to use the touchscreen. It's really great, and it's really handy, and it just shows how much. I know, MSI is supposedly going to release some kind of emulation layer software in their computers and laptops to where you can play Android games on it. I'm intrigued to see what that's going to end up looking like. But effectively, here's that. I mean, that's really all I have to say on it. Is that you can do a lot of really cool things with. I mean, it's nice, especially like with Instagram. Say you wanted to run like an IG TV show, right? An Instagram TV show, which that's a thing. If you didn't know, say you wanted to do that, you could take advantage of the webcam that's built into it, and you could have a very stable platform, and you could even maybe get in some editing and all these other things of what you recorded and then upload it natively to Instagram. I mean, that's really nice. Yes, you can do that on some Windows 10 computers too, but you pay kind of a premium price for that privilege, for the ability to do that, because it's only the higher cost computers that will usually even have a touchscreen on them, as to where, this is becoming far more popular even on lower end, even though this is more of a mid-range Chromebook, even on lower end Chromebooks, that's really a thing. So, all that said, the point that I really want to drive home here is that we are not, or at least it seems right now, we may still end up, all right, here, let me backpedal. Not backpedal. Let me go back a little bit here. My prediction for the future, overall. Okay, first off, I am a short-term pessimist, but a long-term optimist. I think that society as a whole on planet Earth, the future it's looking at is what William Gibson would call the sprawl. Okay, where and it's a lot like your Blade Runner-esque kind of future and so on. I think that's in very much the way that we're going. And I think that there is a lot being pointed in the direction, and I've talked about this in Sovereign Tech Prime episodes, where, you're really going to deal with where everything's kind of the cloud and there's a lot of interactivity and so on. We are not at that future yet, and I think that future might be very far, or might be a good distance off, further off than what I think the tech giants originally hoped for and planned. While over the past few years, 5 years or so, as long as Sovereign Tech's been around, it seemed like Google was really pushing toward this. Everything's going to connect to the cloud. You don't need a lot of, you don't need a lot of onboard storage on whatever device you have, laptop, smartphone, tablet, whatever. Okay, you don't need that. You don't need offline functionality. You don't need this and that. The tech giants have completely backpedaled on that, because now, I mean, what's Apple selling with the 10s and so on? Isn't there like a 512 gig version of that? What the fuck? 5 years ago, we would have said that's crazy. Not because it's crazy to have that much storage in a phone, but because what do you store on the phone? Like, why are you storing shit on your phone? This is what's really interesting. I think, and I have a few different thoughts on this that I've never really necessarily talked about. The creativity that people have been able to bring to life because of not what you can create on a mobile platform, but how much stuff can get consumed on a mobile platform. The creativity that's possible right now due to the democratization of various tools, editing tools and so on computers, and of cameras and whatever else. Okay. Look, Silicon Valley was and still is in a bubble. Okay, blockchain technology staved off that bubble from popping, I think, about a year or two ago. And that's why they're all in on blockchain, because it gives investors something to get excited about. It gives it's a wealth creation tool. Okay, creativity, which is what Apple, right? I mean, Apple has their own streaming service now with their own content and so on, even though it's shitty. Go down the list of the company even the tech giants are effectively becoming entertainment companies, right? Okay, now they know that they have to provide the tools for people to be able to create in the first place. And with that in mind, we're really looking at a real backpedaling on this concept of everything's just connected online, everything's cloud storage, blah, 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 blah. I think Google knows it. Google knows that for people to consume, but then also like to be inspired by that consumption to create themselves. And I hope that they have to release devices that allow people to take advantage of all of the platforms, consumption platforms and creation platforms that the mobile space is allowed, but they've got to allow it on a real environment that you can work on, that you can get shit done on. And that is a laptop/desktop environment, not on a mobile phone. It's not going to work that way. Okay. Even Samsung knows this. That's why they have their DeX platform where, okay, well, you can plug in the phone and then use it like a desktop. I think Apple knows this in a very real way, and I think that's why I think that's why they came out with the 10s Max. They're coming out with 6-inch plus smartphones because they know that the iPhone is like that. That's their bread and butter. But they got to make it to where people can actually interact with them more and kind of do more with it. But so what's interesting is that there's this realization, I think, that mobile. I know that everybody thinks, oh yeah, mobile's the future, and eventually we're in a post-PC world. No, it actually seems like we're going the exact opposite direction. Is that we're going back to at least we're going back to the desktop environment. We're going back to the keyboard, to the keyboard and mouse or the keyboard and touchpad in a very real way. We're going back to all these things, and the companies, the tech giants themselves, are creating the platforms. I mean, this is going to be, just looking ahead, I don't know what's going to end up happening on October 9th exactly, but there are so many leaks of, these different, like I say, the sequels to the Pixel book and so on. And you have, just like the balls to the wall implementation of Chromebooks being able to run Android apps, Linux apps, and so on, creation apps. Right? The ability to create and to interact with the consumption platforms like Instagram and others, but in an environment where, you can get work done and make even better content. Like, they know that to survive, they have to, because I've said this many times, they have to create these platforms. They have to allow these platforms to exist. But point being is that the modern, all right, I'm all over the place here. Okay. Entertainment and art is the thing in the human condition that is infinitely scalable. Even though everything's a remix, the point is that everything can be a remix. Okay? Art is infinitely scalable. It is the thing that is not, and it's not. It's not the scarce resource. I mean, it can be scarce by what individual makes it, but art itself is not scarce. Okay? Because it's so subjective for one thing, but among other, for other reasons. Yeah, I mean, it's technically scarce because, there's only so much paint in the world and there's blah, 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 blah. Yeah, I get that. But you get my point. Okay, is that you can, it's something that you can just infinitely remix. A lot of market categories can come and go and become stale and boring, and you can only go so far with, when eventually, let's just admit it, that, smartphones are just black slabs now. All of them are. There's nothing interesting going on there exactly. And so on, right? But art can just keep getting more and more interesting and can keep evolving and keep going up. And that's why I think the tech giants are into this, are buying into this so much. But art is also wealth creation, right? And so, or it can be when done right. And not that it needs to be, art is just, when done right, is really an expression of, for lack of a better term, the soul. But it can be something that is wealth creating, and they know this. And so, but they have to give you the tools to allow for that wealth creation to keep happening. So for Silicon Valley to stay afloat itself, it knows it has. This is an avenue, just like it's digging into blockchain. It needs to dig into art, and it needs to make it possible to create great art, and so on. And so I think it's interesting that now, there's a complete reversal. We're not going post PC. We're bigger hard drives are being put into these devices, not smaller ones. Offline functionality is being baked into almost every app, even Google's own apps. And that's been going on for a few years now, to where, okay, everything's not going to be interconnected. And they're finally saying, look, if you really need to do shit, you can't do it on a smartphone. We've got to give people the tools, aka a Chromebook that can run Android apps and Linux apps and so on, to where they can create and they can develop and they can do all of that. So there's a very real reversal right now on what I think was the original trajectory of Silicon Valley. And I think that it points at that Silicon Valley was and is wrong on how we like to interact, how we like to consume, and so on. I really think that the piper's getting paid, and they're realizing that the future they wanted just doesn't sit right with people. It doesn't feel right enough, and it actually, it's antithetical to human flourishing. This whole idea of everything connecting to one big cloud, this whole idea of everything being mobile and everything being on a 5-inch screen and so on. It's just that's not how this is going to work. That's not what allows for greatness. And the human condition is about greatness. I know that that's kind of deeply philosophical to get into on a Chromebook review, but it's there. This is a complete my use of this Chromebook, even though I ran into some issues with what I wanted to do, I realized it's early days for Android app functionality and for Linux app functionality. I realize that it's early days and it's probably going to evolve even more. But the main thing that it tells me is that Google knows it was wrong. It's pretty much like, it's rekindling the PC revolution in a very real way. We are not in a post-PC world. That's not happening. And honestly, I would argue that to allow humans to create and to do what we do best, art is what we do. The post-PC revolution can't happen, or the post-PC world can't exist for that to be a thing. And when you can see that even in things that are sub $300, that point is being made, and I think it is, well, that's why I'm only a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist, because in the long term, us having control of what we do and being able to create and not just being consumption machines walking around with our little screens and staring into them and so on, that our innate drive as humans, we'll fight that shit off, and good, fucking good. So do I recommend this Chromebook? Depends on what you need to do. If you're not a podcaster, honestly, if you're just like somebody that uses a word processor for your work or something like that, and you need that for a daily driver, you can fucking use anything, right? Hell, even then, you could use a smartphone and just, connect a Bluetooth keyboard to it and go to town. I think that for the everyday person, I think it's a totally fine buy. For the more tech savvy and someone that's willing to be a little patient with where I think that this platform is going, where this operating system is going, where Chromebooks are going in general, I think that this is a very, very, again, a very secure platform, not necessarily private, but secure, even though those are kissing cousins. This is a very secure platform, and it's a very interesting thing to have as maybe a travel PC. I think it's certainly worthwhile for that. I think Chrome OS has come a very long way, and there's a lot of really nice things about it. I feel like Google's old that they used to have, their old don't be evil and be user friendly and be developer friendly attitude really shines on this. And I got to give them credit for that. It is a nice experience overall to use these things, far nicer than Windows. And look, the Windows 10, the October update came out, right? If you wanted to just jump ship and just say, I'm just done with Microsoft's bullshit and all their changes and what they're doing and everything, I just want to get out of it. This is an intriguing platform to jump ship to. To say nothing of the fact, we might find out in the next Google event that, because they were talking about Campfire, which I think we talked about on the Sovereign Tech Prime episode, where Chromebooks could dual boot into Windows. Then Chromebooks become even more interesting, right? But of course, to use Windows, you're going to need something that has more than 32 gig of storage, right? But yeah, I think overall, again, is it a buy? This is a very nice computer. I think it is a totally fine computer for $260 if you can get it for that or something. Do it, like that, and everything I described to you is enough to be able to do it, because it's a beautiful little machine for what it is. It really, really is. If you're a power user of any kind, it's not exactly there yet. There's still a couple of really just flunky things that are going to annoy you in your workflow. And if you're like me, where you're kind of always working, you can't have that. Processes have to be efficient. But yeah, maybe, or if you want to get into a Pixelbook, that would solve a lot of these problems, because Pixelbooks have huge hard drives in them, or larger hard drives in them. And that, but wait for the new ones. But that would solve a lot of my concerns. And also they have, they'll have Core i5s or even Core i7s in them. That's where things get really interesting. So if you had a really high-end machine, I think that a lot of what I described as negatives could really be resolved, could really be mitigated. So that's something to consider when you're going for this as well. I am pleased to see where Chrome OS has gone. I am pleased to see the way that everything, having all those apps but still doing it securely, where everything's sandboxed. That's the right move. Having because if the average person doesn't want to use it, they don't have to, and it doesn't get in their way unless they turn it on. All of that is great. I think that's all a very good thing. For what it is, again, don't expect privacy. But for what it is, I think it's phenomenal. I think it's a really, really impressive option out there. And, as far as like a web browsing experience where you want that to be secure, yeah, I mean, grandma's never going to use dark Android shit, right? I mean, she's just not. But a Chromebook, oh yeah, that's very, very interesting, for her to use. And I think that it allows for a lot of options. And I mean, because she's probably using a smartphone. And I think that this, yeah, I like where this is going, even though fuck Google. And, if you're a power user, fuck Chromebooks. I mean, they're just not there. Okay. But I do love what this is saying. It's saying to me that no, we're not in a post-PC world, and we still need control. We still need offline functionality, with our devices. And that's a hopeful thing for me. So anyway, that's it. I went well over an hour here. I did not expect to talk about a Chromebook that long. We'll wrap this up. And thank you to the Sovereign Tech listener that went through my wish list and provided this Chromebook for me. I'm really honored by that, and I'm definitely going to use it continually and keep an eye on the platform. It's really handy for that, and it's great for travel. So anyway, I will see all of you on the other side. So much more to come out in October, baby. You know it. I got it. I'll see you on the other side.